We've got some updates from the southern border. More than 11,000 migrants crossed into the United States yesterday alone, the second day this week to hit that unprecedented threshold. There are currently more than 25,000 migrants in custody across the border. More than 7,000 alone are in El Paso. The flow of migrants reaching the U.S.-Mexico border rose 27% in September. Customs and Border Protection estimates over 232,000 people entered the U.S. illegally in just the last month.
A new NBC poll shows voters trust Republicans to do a better job securing the border than Democrats. Earlier this week, Speaker Kevin McCarthy tore into the Biden administration's handling of the crisis. Let's watch.
No longer will we sit back and allow him to ignore the problems that he has created. Schumer has chosen to ignore his governor, to ignore his mayor, to not act on this. Well, you know what? We will give the president and the Democrats an opportunity to do something about this border.
Here to discuss this further is Allie Bradley, NewsNation's Southwest correspondent, who joins us from Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me back.
All right, maybe we should start by talking about what are the causes behind this influx of immigration.
Well, you know, it's always up to the cartels what's going to happen. We know at the end of Title 42, there were hundreds of thousands of people waiting in Mexico. That was according to DHS and Border Patrol sources. But it's always up to the cartel, and we're always in a reactionary standpoint. Now, after Title 42 ended, we had a little bit of a lull in June. We had a little slowdown. And we widely reported here at NewsNation that lawmakers and law enforcement individuals were saying that the reason for that was the cartel was kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to see how the United States was going to enforce Title 8. Title 8, of course, DHS Secretary Mayorkas saying it would be a removal authority where if someone crossed between the ports of entry, those individuals would be removed in an expedited manner and they would be ineligible for asylum for 5 years. That is what DHS says. That is what they said after the end of Title 42, which is really scary, right? There's a lot of consequence to that. So what the cartel was doing was waiting to see how we would enforce that. So we had a lull in June, then we started to see numbers go back up in July and August again at 233,000 in the month of just unprecedented crossings. They're the highest in the calendar year. And so, you know, we're talking about what the cartel's doing in these holding patterns, and they're seeing what's happening. So droves of people come in. They aren't being removed. They aren't being kicked back. And the cartel isn't seeing these people multiple times because they are entered into what DHS calls removal proceedings. Now, what is that? A removal proceeding includes generally an NTA, a notice to appear, and an ankle monitor or a cell phone. Those notices to appear might not be for 2 to 5 years out. So that messaging is getting back that there aren't really consequences to crossing the southern border right now. That messaging is more powerful. That word of mouth messaging and the messaging from the cartel is more powerful and more controlled than the messaging coming from DHS.
Just to clarify, when you're talking about the cartels, when I asked about what's causing immigration, I thought you were going to say something about the conditions that these people are fleeing from, which I suppose is related to, you're talking about drug cartels, organized crime in various countries. Can you elaborate? Because you're talking about them as though almost like they're a national presence who are making policy decisions on behalf of masses of immigrants. And I just want a little clarification there.
Yeah, you're exactly right, though. They are absolutely fleeing something from their countries. That's what they say. Now, when you even look at CBP and DHS, they say the majority of these individuals don't qualify for asylum. At this juncture, the majority of people we're seeing are economic migrants. They're here seeking a better life. They're trying to get more for their children. When I've talked with them, Brianna, they've told me that they are leaving nothing. They are trying for something. And worst case scenario, they go back to nothing. So why they left their country could be a multiple reasons. It could be persecution. It could be, you know, that they are scared to live there. They're in fear. It could be a personal thing of domestic violence. They're fleeing a spouse. But some of those things won't qualify for asylum here in the United States, but they are still being released into the country to go through those asylum proceedings to get that claim adjudicated. So that will take 2 to 5 years. So they don't have judges down at the southern border making that determination right away when these individuals are crossing. And they're saying, hey, we're here to work. We don't have any family here. We're traveling by ourselves. Well, that person clearly does not qualify for asylum by congressional law. But most of those individuals, like I said, are being released with a court date and an ankle monitor or a cell phone and being required to check in with ICE.
So, well, that's all going on at the border, and obviously you're seeing a lot of it. Here in D.C., the Biden administration is continuing to characterize things at the border as orderly and humane. Can you talk about whether that matches with what you're seeing down there?
It doesn't match at all, because we just reported on a 2-month-old child that was abandoned at the border in the Rio Grande Valley. So you cannot say that it is orderly and humane when a 2-year-old is dumped off with a backpack full of diapers and formula. That does not match. It does not make sense. And what Karine Jean-Pierre is saying, with the border being closed and the president doing more than any other president to stop the flow here, that's wrong. It's a false narrative, because, again, in August alone, we saw 233,000 people cross the southern border. We are seeing an unprecedented number of family units. We are seeing an unprecedented number of unaccompanied children. That 2-month-old child was one of an average of 380 every single day coming across that southern border alone. That's how many children HHS is saying on average they're seeing every day. There are currently nearly 11,000 in HHS custody. So to most people, that wouldn't be a humane situation. Now, why is that happening? Well, Biden in the very beginning of the administration made it very clear that we weren't going to detain children like that. We weren't going to separate children. And so migrants know, and the messaging, again, very powerful, that the cartel tells them you're going to have a better chance of getting into the United States if you have a child with you. And some of these migrants are apparently not even paying to use one of these children, these childs, to cross, because the cartel wants to keep people moving. This is what a retired HSI and ICE special agent just told me yesterday, that they want to keep these individuals moving. So if they have a child, the likelihood of them getting in and moving is better, is greater. And they're also using these children as distractions. This 2-month-old, what Victor Avila with HSI was saying, is that these little ones are often sent across, and they are used to pull Border Patrol and every other law enforcement agency into that space. So that child was abandoned in a park. How many hands on deck do you think there were? All of them. So you look at what the cartel is doing, and they say, oh, there's holes over there now because we sent a child over. Border Patrol's busy. Now we can work over here. And that's the reality right now that's happening down there, you guys.
Yeah, it really speaks to how horrible the conditions people are fleeing must be to be able to not only risk their own lives, but their lives of their families. It really speaks to an incredible desperation that makes me reflect on some foreign policy choices we should probably be making differently, given the economic nature of what so many people are fleeing and the role that U.S. sanctions have on so many of the countries people are leaving. I want to ask you about a point you made earlier, that a minority of people who are seeking asylum actually qualify for asylum. Statistics suggest that you're right. It's about 20% of people who seek asylum who successfully qualify for asylum. Given that still that's a significant chunk of people who do meet the requirements of our asylum laws, which are something as Americans that we're very proud of, that we have this Statue of Liberty symbolizing how we've been a haven for immigrants fleeing persecution since the founding of this country. What is the way to address, how can one best address the reality that some people are genuinely seeking asylum and counterbalance that with this incentive, the urge from many conservatives just to summarily send people back over without giving them an opportunity to see an administrative law judge and be given an ankle bracelet and a cell phone, as you've described?
Well, that isn't happening because they have the opportunity to go to the port of entry. They have multiple opportunities to go legally and apply for that CBP-1 app and do it that way.
Right, under Biden, but that's, people are arguing against that, right? People are saying that this is a crisis and that we have to remain in Mexico or send people back without giving them that asylum process. So how do you balance our interest in having asylum laws and something we're very proud of as citizens against people having this frustration with the backlog that's created at the border because we don't have enough resources going to actually process people?
Well, Remain in Mexico isn't taking away the asylum process. They would just wait in Mexico while their asylum process played out here. That's that. They wouldn't not get asylum if they're waiting in Mexico. They would wait and remain in Mexico so they stay over there in that 2 to 5 years or whatever time it takes to adjudicate that case.
Well, they're not getting asylum then, right?
Say they don't get to claim asylum. They have the opportunity. The judge says they have to have that opportunity to claim asylum, right? So it's hard because how do you stop the foot traffic between the ports and get the people out of the hands of the cartel? Because they have to have an opportunity to claim asylum. So that is a challenge that they're going to face. They likely need to create more legal pathways at the ports or expand that, because you are still seeing the vast majority of people are crossing between the ports right now, which is dangerous for them, right? We've seen several drownings, and it's also dangerous for law enforcement, but it is helping the cartel. So we're fueling the cartel by allowing that process to continue. So, many people think allowing more legal, pathways through the ports or whatever it might be would be a better option, because they want to remove these people out of the criminal element. They don't want them to have to go through the cartel to get into the United States. And so what does that look like? We don't know, right? They obviously can't figure that out on the congressional side either, because everything that we do has a reaction. So even if we put something into place, the cartel is likely going to figure out how to navigate around that, whether it's digging a tunnel, throwing a rope over, it doesn't matter what it is. We've got to get into the root of, like you said, what is causing them to flee their countries. We have a border czar named Kamala Harris who has visited some of those countries, but maybe she could go visit a little bit more and find out some more of those root causes that we can attack, right? And then it's what happens with these individuals once they're over here and the humane process that's over here. And if we're going to be allowing this, then we can't allow people to be on the streets in New York like they are. If this open border situation, to a degree, it's a porous border, is going to continue, then agents, law enforcement, everybody agrees the federal government needs to make it humane, make it a system that works. Because right now, a mayor in New York City saying we need $5 billion federal dollars to help out. We've got people sleeping on the streets. Most people would argue that's not a humane situation, and that's not a situation that's working for New York or the migrants. So obviously Congress has to work hard to figure out a solution. What that is, it's been a political football for 40 years, and we're going into a really contentious
unfortunately, there's a real tension between saying, I'm going to put sanctions on Venezuela because I want to punish communism and an influx of Venezuelan immigrants and people living in economic precarity because of American sanctions and American foreign policy. You can't be a party, I think, that both supports those kinds of sanctions, doesn't want to address the immigration problem by actually resourcing administrative law judges to process asylum claims at the border, and which is now threatening a government shutdown that is not funding border agents or administrative law judges at the border. I think all of these things are exacerbating the problem. I agree. I hope that there is some real bipartisan interest in solving what is ultimately a humanitarian crisis. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ali.
Yeah, thank you guys. Take care.